Do you use stories in your classroom? Do you have some engaging ways for students to, engage with those stories? Well, in this third episode of the CI Toolbox series, we look at storytelling and narrative based activities that hook students through emotion, curiosity, and creativity. You'll learn how to deliver compelling stories, co-write summaries with students, and use video clips as interactive narratives, all while keeping input comprehensible and student-centered. So let's jump in. Whether you're planning your first lesson or celebrating your 20th year in the language classroom, I understand exactly where you are. I'm Joshua Cabral, and I'm also a language teacher in my 29th year of teaching. Now, I also have the opportunity to support schools and teachers all across the country who are working towards increasing proficiency and building confidence in their students. This is the World Language Classroom Podcast, with over 200 episodes of practical strategies tested in real classrooms just like yours and mine. So let's jump in. Vamos, allons-y. Hello, my friends. Bonjour, mes amis. Hola, mis amigos. Welcome to the World Language Classroom Podcast. I am Joshua Cabral, and thank you for always spending your time with me each week to talk about language teaching, to look at your own teaching, to feel that you're on the right track, and to get some new ideas. Just one of the many things, as I always tell you, that I know that you do to be an incredible language teacher. So thank you so much for spending this time with me. And on today's episode, we are going to dive into another set of CI strategies. I've already done 2 episodes on these. This is the third one. I'll get into that a little bit more. But our idea for this episode is to talk about storytelling and narratives in our classroom. And stories are so powerful because they're a way of really hooking in a student, all of our students, so that they are intrigued, they want to know more, and they want to understand the story in the target language. And as Stephen Krashen says, we want our input to be compelling, not just comprehensible. So it's so compelling and interesting that students almost forget that it's in the target language because they're so interested in the content and the story. So that's really why we want to use stories in our classroom. It's that way of really hooking our students in. So I just want to tell you about one time where I was doing this with my students, and I came in and I just started telling them this story, and they were so intrigued by it that I don't think they even realized I was speaking in Spanish anymore. They weren't interested in that. They were so wanting to know what happened and reacting to the story. So I walked in and I told the story about a student who had brought a raccoon to school in his backpack one day. This is about 10 years ago when I was teaching in another school before I came here. So he opened his backpack and this raccoon just stuck his head out. And everyone was thinking, did he know there was a raccoon in there? Did he purposely bring it to school? What's going to happen with that? And so when I told this story, the class just totally lost it. They were shouting things like, he's crazy. That's a crazy idea. Why would a student bring a raccoon? Why is there they weren't actually saying raccoon. They didn't know that word at the time, but through the story, we did learn that word. But they were saying, he comes to school with an animal in his backpack because they were circumlocuting. And then they were asking me, were you afraid? Were other students afraid? Does he know that there's an animal in his backpack? So all the students were totally hooked and they wanted to know what happened. Now, this did not happen in my classroom, but it really got them intrigued. So we started using that as an opportunity to create this story together because I started with a hook that really got them interested, and they learned the word for raccoon, and they were able to circumlocute a bit and ask some questions about the story. And when they eventually told them it wasn't true, we said, let's write our own story about this possibly happening. Do we want to keep the same animal, change the animal? And so we used the base of the story that I had told them to create our own, and then we added in lots of details, and their animal ended up being a cat, so it wasn't, as interesting as a raccoon, but we wanted to make sure it was all words that they knew, so they were able to tell the story. But that was how we started it, and it really hooked them in at the very beginning about hearing this story. So stories are so powerful with our students. is they're always putting all of our structures and our vocabulary into context. So they're not just learning a list of vocabulary or a grammar rule, but they're seeing it in real use, connected to other structures, connected to other vocabulary, and part of the overall narrative. So that is so powerful in our language classroom when we are using stories as a way to contextualize vocabulary and language structures, and also cultural elements that are happening in our target language cultures. Bringing those into the stories, embedding them in as well, is so powerful. And as you're putting it in this context, stories are going to speak to students' emotions, whether it's something they find scary or they're happy about, or that's a sad part of the story. Or when I told them about the raccoon, they were just very intrigued and they had an emotional reaction to that. They wanted to know more. And also in stories, there's that opportunity for students to predict what might happen in the story. So as we are using stories in our classroom, whether they are really short stories, short narratives, longer novel level, whether you're doing a CI reader or a longer novel in a more advanced AP class, we have this opportunity to contextualize the vocabulary, to draw on students' emotions as they invest in understanding the story, and as they start to predict what might happen in the story. It's really building this foundation of comprehensible input where they are intrigued enough, where they do want to understand the language so that they can make sense of the story. And as students are engaging with the story, it allows us to recycle high frequency structures and vocabulary meaningfully, and then also add in new vocabulary and newer structures in a way that's comprehensible to students because it's embedded within language that they are mostly understanding at that point. So you're really doing an I+1 there, where I is their current almost total understanding of the target language, and then those extra or new vocabulary words and structures are the +1, where they draw on the parts of the language that they do understand to make sense of those new elements. So that's always what we want to be doing with stories. Is it's good once in a while to have a story that's completely comprehensible and then you can just do some activities with it, but always remembering to use it as an opportunity to expose students to new language so that they can acquire as they're engaging with the story. So in this episode, we are going to dive deep into 3 narrative-like activities that can be your go-to activities whenever you are introducing a new story to your students. And these are really effective tools for your teacher toolbox. I call it your CI Toolbox because these activities really do focus on comprehensible input. And they're really going to help to transform your class into a story-driven community. So this is the 3rd in my series of CI Toolbox episodes, and I'm calling them your toolbox episodes because they are activities that you can take and do in your classroom almost right away. Some of them require a little prep, most of them not much prep at all. So the first episode was episode 218, where I talked about activities that focus on interaction and discussion in the classroom. And then on episode 222, we looked specifically at reading and writing activities, CI activities that are focused on reading and writing. So today, we're going to be focusing on storytelling and narrative. So when you take all 3 of these episodes together, you'll have a really cohesive understanding of effective CI activities in your classroom. So I'm going to put the links to episodes 218 and 222 in the show notes so that you can go back and listen to those if you haven't heard them already. And there's also a link in the show notes to get your own copy of my CI Toolbox document. This is a free document. You can just go to the link. It's on my website, and you can download the PDF that has all 15 of the activities that we've been talking about as we go through this series. It explains how to do them, the time that will be needed to do each one. They're usually about 7 to 10 to 12 minutes sometimes, and then some tips for making it effective in your classroom. So you can get that at wlclassroom.com/toolbox, or the link is in the show notes. And then after I've done this episode and you've had a chance to listen to all 3, I'm going to do 2 episodes where I'm going to take all of the activities and use them with a very simple 2 to 3 paragraph story. It'll mostly be a novice high to intermediate low story. So I will tell you the story quickly, and then I will go through all of the activities and show how you can use each one of these activities with that simple story. And if you have a more elaborate story, you can definitely use them for that as well. But I just want to show you that you'll be able to take that simple story and use all 15 of these CI activities that I've talked about over this series of episodes and use them in your classroom very easily, because most of them require almost no prep. But first, we have to do today's episode about storytelling and narrative, and you have to have an opportunity to listen to episodes 218 and 222 about interaction and discussion and reading and writing so that you're ready for those episodes when they come up. So let's start with our first activity for storytelling and narrative, and this is what's called story listening in the CI world. And this is a way to deliver really rich input by telling stories to students live with built-in visual and physical support. So whether you are showing pictures of vocabulary, or you're acting something out, or you're drawing something on the board, but it's some way of telling the story to students, and you provide visuals to make it comprehensible, particularly for that new vocabulary, those new structures that might be coming out. So what does this look like in your classroom? So you tell a story in the target language while enhancing the comprehension using drawings and gestures and acting, maybe some props, anything that will make it really clear. Now, this could be a story on its own. It could be a short story that's a page long, a half a page. Those happen. Or it could be a chapter in a novel, a chapter in a CI novel. It could be a chapter in a much larger novel, a much longer novel. So it doesn't matter what the actual text is. You are going to be delivering the content of this to students before they read it. So that's the whole idea about this, is they're not reading along with you. You are telling them the story so that they can listen and hear and understand the story with the support that you are providing to make the language comprehensible. So an example of this might be, you say that a new student arrives to school, but this is not just any normal student. This student has a secret. He's famous on TikTok and nobody knows. So as you're doing this, so it's a student arrives at school, so you could maybe do an acting out of arriving, open the door, entering in. But the student is not just like every other student. This isn't any normal student. The student has a secret, and maybe secret is a cognate in your language, so you can just sort of leave it at that. And then you say that he is famous on TikTok and nobody knows. And maybe the word nobody is a new word, or knows is a new word. So you somehow want to gesture to what knows means, maybe pointing to your mind, like your head, to say nobody knows. And so that you can make it very understandable to students. And then you go on to describe that he has 5 million followers. And maybe you show a picture of TikTok, or take out your own TikTok if you have it on your phone, and point to what the word followers is in your target language, and use structures like wants and has, goes, says. Those are sometimes what we call our Sweet 16 or our Super 7, whatever those types of verbs that you're using in your classroom. But the whole idea is you want to make the story really engaging, tell it in a way that's really engaging for students, and then use visuals, props, acting out, drawing, so that students can understand what it is. Now, I just used this idea of the famous TikTok student, but it can be whatever topic is coming up in the story that you're reading. Maybe it's a story that's an actual narrative. It might be more of an article that's talking about something cultural within the country, or an event that's happening. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a fiction story. It can be an actual article where you're talking about the details that are in it as well. But as you do this, it's a way to foreshadow what students are going to read so that they have an understanding before they go into it. But remember, we're doing this in the target language. So we're not going to be translating for them. We're only going to be using visuals, if necessary, to help them scaffold with understanding the story. But then they will be reading it. So that is the second part. But this initial part is to show them that they can understand the story and help them to foreshadow what might be coming up. And this works really well when you use stories that have surprise or conflict or humor, those types of things that are going to draw on the students' emotions and that they want to understand. And use it as an opportunity to repeat structures naturally, using the word has over and over again or knows over and over again, whatever those structures are or that vocabulary that you want students to understand. Use it a couple of times and recycle it through so that students hear it in context multiple times. Now, as you're doing this, keep in mind the proficiency level of your students for sure. So if you're doing this with novice level students, you really want to focus on 3, maybe 4, sometimes 5 really core structures and lots of visuals. You don't want to do a lot of new vocabulary because you want them to feel comfortable with what they do understand. Whereas at a more intermediate level, you could probably add in more vocabulary because a lot of it they'll already understand. The same goes for language structures. But at that intermediate level, use it as an opportunity with stories that are a little more challenging to understand, require really paying attention to particular vocabulary as you're going through. So you will differentiate based on the proficiency level of your students. And as you're telling the story, do some sort of signals with students so that they can show if they're understanding, either asking yes, no questions, either or questions, not necessarily open-ended at that point because you really want to be moving on with the story, but just ask, did he have 5 million or 6 million followers? So they're not coming up with open-ended at that point, particularly for your novice, lower intermediate students. For your higher proficiency level students, you could have it a bit more interactive with the open-ended questions, but it's really about an opportunity to check for understanding because this isn't story asking where students are offering details as you tell the story and that could change the trajectory of where you're going. This is storytelling where you are telling them the story as they will read it. So you're not necessarily asking students to contribute to modifying the story as you're going. That would be story asking. And if you want to make this a bit more engaging, you could have students draw a comic strip of the story or retell to a partner the next day using visuals to guide their target language use as well. But they haven't read it yet. So this is really just priming them for when they will be reading it. They will be seeing some of that new vocabulary in context as well as the structures that you're focusing on. So this whole concept of story listening is really about making the language comprehensible to students as they are understanding the story by listening before they engage with reading the text. So the next activity is one of my go-tos all the time, and this is the write and discuss. And this really reinforces and recycles so much of the language from the narrative. This works particularly well with narrative stories that are fiction that actually tell a plot. But you could do this just as easily after watching a video about a cultural celebration in some way, or watching a commercial, or watching a music video. So it doesn't necessarily have to be a story that you're reading. The language input can come from many different ways. But when you do a write and discuss, this is about co-creating a text with students. So this is what it looks like. You start by watching a video, discussing a video, you do some other CI activities to make sure you understand it. You've read a chapter in a book, you've read a short story, whatever it is that you've done in class that day, whether it was listening, whether it was reading, discussion, whatever that topic is, the write and discuss is the way that you take 5, 8, maybe 10 minutes at the end of the class and you co-create a summary of all of that together with students. So once you have used language in some way in your class, then you want to project a doc up, whether you're doing this on a Word doc or a Google doc, project it up so students can see it, or you can write directly on the whiteboard in your room, however you want to do this. I tend to do it on a Google Doc so that I have the record of it. And then I begin to ask students to tell me what happened in the story from the beginning. And as they tell the story, or they tell the details from the article you read, or told you details about the music video you watched and the lyrics that you discussed, whatever it is, so ask students to start to summarize what that is. And you ask them questions. What was the character's name? Where do they live? Depending on their proficiency level, some of those questions are going to help them produce the language. And as they give those details, you as the teacher either write on the board or type in your Google Doc or your Word doc, and you write the sentences that are doing the summary of everything that they're talking about. And as we do that, we are making accurate language so that we're taking what might be sometimes an inaccurate suggestion of students in terms of the structure of language, but the information is correct. We take that and we put it in the summary using correct language so that students see that. And then once it's done, you end up with 3 to 8 sentences, depending on how long you're spending on it. All of this is student-generated language. It's what they learned throughout the class. They learned through the discussions or the video or the reading. And so at the end, you have this 5 to 8 sentence summary that is 100% comprehensible for the most part to students because they offered all of the details that went into it. So if you had done something with the famous TikTok kid story, so you could ask, who was the main character? And the students would say, oh, a new student. Now, they didn't say it was a new student, but when you write it up there, you could say the main character was a new student. So you would write there was a new student and nobody knew he was famous. So the students may not be producing the language in the past, but as I write it up there, I am putting it in the past. Some students might do that. And so it's an opportunity to make sure that you're using those language structures as well. Now, you might push students. So if you say who was the main character in the story, then you will push them and they'll say the student. So then you could say the main character is a student or was a student. And then they could say, oh, he was a student because you asked the question in the past. But in the end, you are putting it all together in the language that you know that students are going to understand and make it 100% comprehensible, but making sure that our questions and the language that we write is using the vocabulary and the structures that we want to focus on. And then once it's done, it can be used in so many different ways that you can use it to expand on the text the next day. Sometimes I'll have students do a do now the next day where I will put the document up again and I will take words out and they have to rewrite certain sentences, putting the details in. So there's many different ways to do this. You could put it in the present tense and ask them to put it in the past because that's the way they had written it yesterday, if it was the TikTok story. So lots of ways to do this. And I recommend doing it in some sort of doc if you are able to project it and you have that technology in your classrooms so that you can have the text moving forward. If you have to write it on your board because you don't have the technology, and you can take a picture of it so you can have it moving forward so you can use it for other activities, follow-up activities, review activities in the future, that could be helpful as well. And there are differing opinions about what students should be doing as you're writing the text. Some teachers don't have students copy it as you're writing it. They're just engaged in the creation of it. I tend to have students write the text along with me. It keeps them more focused and it makes sure that all of the students are engaged and not just the few that tend to be the ones that offer the examples. So then students end up with their own copy of the text rather than me having to always project it up or perhaps photocopying it for doing a follow-up activity after. So my students have a section of their notebook that is for their write and discuss. So we always title it, we give it a number depending on how many we've done that year or that term. So when I say turn to the write and discuss number 17, so that we all have the text in front of us. And then the third activity that is focused on narrative and storytelling is this idea of doing a clip chat. Now, a clip chat is when you are using usually a short video. A lot of times they're animated. They don't have to be. It could be a clip from a movie. It could be a commercial. but it's something visual that is in the form of video. So with this, you want to turn the short video clips into interactive storytelling experiences for students. So what this looks like is you play the clip initially silently, and sometimes there may not be any language. There's no actual speaking in it. It's just music, and it tells the story just visually. Sometimes there's actually speaking in it. So as you play it silently, you want to pause as you're going through every 5, 10, 15, 20 seconds to ask questions about what students are seeing on the screen so that they can help to tell the story based on what they see happening. So the very first time you stop it will most likely be at the beginning, where you are going to set the scene. Where are they? What are they doing? Who do you see here? Is somebody purchasing something? Is somebody in their bedroom? Students create the scenario based on what they're seeing on the screen. And then as you move through, start to tell the story. So, okay, they're not in the house anymore. Now where are they? Who stayed in the house? Who walked out of the house? And as you're telling the story, you may need to add in some details, some vocabulary, maybe a language structure, as students are trying to say something, and you want to make sure they have the language for that. So what I usually do before a clip chat is I decide on these are the 20 new vocabulary words we're going to focus on. So I will specifically make sure that I ask the questions that get students to say those words or want to say those words. So if you ask, oh, what happened here? And a student says, oh, she fell. Now, what actually happened in the clip is she tripped on a step going down the stairs. And so you know that students are going to just say fell because they don't know how to say trip and they don't know how to say the individual step and a staircase. So then you can add that in and say, oh, because she tripped on a step on the stairs, and then add that new vocabulary in, and they can see visually that that's what's happening, and that's actually what they wanted to say in the first place. So you're able to use this as an opportunity to not have to translate because you have the visual, and it's language that students are actually trying to create on their own. So as you're watching and you're stopping and you're talking about it and you're telling the story, when these new words and structures come up, I keep a running list on the board. I use the chart paper because I have several different classes doing the same one and they might not necessarily come up with the vocabulary in the same order. So I do the chart paper so I can switch it out for each class. And sometimes there are words that come up in a class that don't come up in another class. They weren't words that I anticipated, but it somehow came up in a question or something. So I keep my individual lists for the individual classes. And then once you get to the end, you can then watch the video all the way through and see if students can make sense of it using the language. And then you can do lots of follow-up activities where students write a summary. You do many of the other CI activities for reading and writing that I mentioned on the previous episode, but there's a lot of follow-up that you can do. But the idea is that because you're using the video, it is visual, and students are understanding the vocabulary, and that is what's making the language comprehensible for them. The other thing that I do is I take screenshots rather than playing the actual video and then pausing it each time, because sometimes it doesn't pause in exactly the right place, or it might be a little blurred the way you pause it. So I will do screenshots and put them on a Google slide so that we'll tell the story through those. And then on the last slide, I'll put the link to the YouTube video where you can find it. There are two particular clip chats that my students enjoy very much. One is called Snack Attack, which is a Pixar-style short about a woman, and she's it looks like she's a cookie thief of some sort, but you'll have to watch the video to see that Snack Attack. And then there's also The Present, which is about a boy who receives a dog who is differently abled or has a disability. So with these clips, they are a way of bringing in emotion for students because they have a reaction to what's happening. I always like to stop the story and then continue it the next day so that students don't see exactly what happens, but they're anticipating what might possibly happen, and it keeps them intrigued and they want to come back tomorrow and see what happened. And once in a while, students will come in and they'll say, oh, I went and found Snack Attack on YouTube, and so I know what happens. And I just think to myself, oh my gosh, you were so intrigued by this story and so invested in it that you went home and looked it up on YouTube to see what happened. Even though they think, oh, I did a bad thing, they say that I went home and I looked for it. And in my mind, I'm just thinking, oh my gosh, I love that they were so invested in understanding the story that they couldn't go a whole day without understanding what happened. So if you're going to be using the clip chat, always watch the videos in advance. I know that sounds like an obvious thing, but I've seen situations where teachers don't, and then sometimes it goes a little awry. So make sure that you know where you're going to pause. Make sure you know the vocabulary you want to focus on so it just doesn't end up being random. And I would recommend doing the screenshots because you'll have it going forward and you'll know exactly where to stop. And then choose videos that have little to no dialogue because you want it to be very much telling a story without necessarily needing to hear the target language to tell the story because you're watching it without sound, so it should be narrative in itself. And then in terms of differentiation for novice level students, you want to focus on what's visible, asking a lot of yes or no questions, either or questions. Whereas at the intermediate level, you can focus more on some cause and effect, like what happened and why did it happen, what led to it, motivations, predictions about what might happen. So just make sure that as you are using them with different levels, that you're having them engage with it differently. You can actually use the same video with different levels, but how you have students engage will look a little different from that. So in this episode, we started by looking at story listening, where you are telling the story and the students are essentially living it, and you're making it very comprehensible to them through listening and visuals before they read the text. And then we looked at a write and discuss, where you are co-creating a summary and students are providing the details for the summary of whatever you did in class that day. And then we have our clip chat, where students see the story and they help contribute to the narration and reacting to what's happening in the story as well. So even if you're just getting started with CI, these story-based strategies are really high impact at even the beginning entry points. So you're not just teaching language, remember, you're building a story-rich environment in your classroom that you really want to pull students into. So a little bit of a challenge for you for this week is I would say try telling a 2-minute story this week, make it funny or weird or relatable to students, and then build in a quick class summary afterwards where perhaps you're doing the write and discuss. Let me know how it goes. Tag me at WL Classroom on social media. I'd love to see how it's going for you and your classrooms. I'd love to see how that's working in your classroom. And try a write and discuss, whether it is because you watched a video or you told a story. Try the write and discuss where you have students help you create the summary of what's going on in your classroom. But you have your storytelling, your write and discuss, and your clip chat in this episode. And remember, the links to the other 2 CI Toolbox activities are in the show notes. They were episode 218 on interaction and discussion and episode 222 on reading and writing. And coming up soon, you'll hear an episode where I take a simple short story and I overlay all of the activities that are in the Toolbox document so you can see how you can easily use them with any story. And the Toolbox, to get your own copy, the free PDF that has all of the activities in it, is at wlclassroom.com/toolbox, or that link is in the show notes as well. Thanks for listening and for all the incredible work you're doing to help your students become confident, real-world communicators. If you're looking for ways to bring more proficiency-focused strategies into your teaching, I'd love to work with you or your school. We can connect through an on-site workshop, a live virtual session, or self-paced professional development your whole department can do together. And for individual teachers, I have my Ready for Tomorrow Quick Win PD courses that give you practical ideas you can use in your class right away. I'm sure there's an option that fits your needs. All the details are in the show notes and on my website, wlclassroom.com. So try out these CI activities in your class this week and let me know how it goes. I will talk to you soon. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. Be sure to follow or subscribe so you don't miss a single episode. And let's stay connected on social media. You can find me at WL Classroom pretty much everywhere. You'll also find lots of ideas, suggestions, and resources on my website, WLClassroom.com. Now stay curious, keep learning, and continue the great work you do inspiring and supporting your students.